as we now turn to our Torah reading, the Parsha of Matot Mas'eh, the final two parshiot, the final two selections from the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers. I am fascinated by beginnings and final words. Opening words often foreshadow what is to come. And this, the fourth of the five books of Moses, the book of Bamidbar, often translated as Numbers, begins with a census. For the message is clear. As it begins, it is the first month of the second year, the first day of the second month of the second year of the going out from Egypt, which is to say the first sentence of Bamidbar points to the past, the reminder how long it's been since this people have left bondage as they continue a journey through the desert, headed toward the promised land. And the first thing that happens in Bamidbar is a census, for the message is conveyed that community counts every member, beginning with its leaders. And that's what happens in Bamidbar. For ultimately, this is a journey of a community. The journey recounted in the book of Numbers encompasses 38 years, difficult years for the people, in that during this journey they will have physical challenges, but more, they will have those psycho-spiritual challenges of both self-doubt, but also doubt in God and God's messenger Moses as to their ability to move into a new land, a land that has a powerful people. They lose their vision of why they have sought freedom. And so there is crisis after crisis. But as they move forward, and forward they move, they do so with the Torah. In a loose way, there is no book as such at that point, but Torah means literally a teaching. The teaching of Mount Sinai, in which the 10 statements of fealty to God, the ketubah, the written understanding of a relationship with God, was proclaimed, and all the other laws that get unpacked and revealed in both the book of Exodus, the book of Leviticus, and throughout this march of Bamidbar. And so, as I say, I'm fascinated by beginnings and ends. And so what is the very, very end, the last paragraph of the entire book of Numbers, noting that starting next week with the final book, Devarim, then there's no more narrative. In the final book, it's Moses standing before the people that he has led for 40 years and tries to sum up what they have gone through, where they're going, and what is the law, what is the moral compass that will guide them as a free people, a responsible people in the promised land. And so the last paragraph concerns the daughters of Zelophehad and a question about Jewish law. Now, on one hand, we're taught that at Mount Sinai, God gave Moses the law. But last week, in our Torah reading of Parshat Pinchas, there was a challenge to Moses. And here's the predicament that God presented last week, which will be the focus of the final paragraph of Bamidbar. In chapter 26, verse 55, it says that the land was to be allocated to all the tribes. Again, Moses last week is looking forward, preparing the people, and says, we're going to have land divided between each of the 12 plus 1 tribes, in that Joseph has 2 sons. They're treated as firstborns. Levites don't get a portion, so that there will be these allocations of land, and that'll be done by lottery, and that will endure as the identity of these tribes as they enter the land. And in that context, that land, tribe by tribe, will be inheritance only through the men. And so here's the problem that is the next part of Pinchas and the final discussion of Bamidbar. And that is chapter 27, verse 7. Presents 5 daughters. And these 5 daughters comes before Moses. And they say to him, actually it starts a little earlier, chapter 27. And they say, they stood before Moses and before Eleazar HaKohen, before the princes and all the congregation at the entrance to the gate. And here's what they say. Avinu, our father, made Bamidbar, he died in the desert. And he died, uvanim lo hayulo, and he had no sons. Verse 4. Lama yigara shem avinu mitoch mishpachto. Why should our father's name be obliterated among his extended family? Ki ein lo banim, just because he had no sons. Tina lanu achuza b'toch achei avinu. Give to us his portion of his extended family, of our father. And so here again is the predicament. Every tribe's going to get a certain allocated parcel in the promised land to be held in perpetuity, but only to be passed on from father to son. These 5 daughters of Zelophehad say, our father had no sons. Why should his inheritance be lost? But here's the first thing that I want to note. I took a class at Pepperdine Law School just last summer for 1 week on mediation. And here's the main thing that I took away, though I took away much. And that is, if there's somebody who has an opinion different than your own, where you begin is not with your claim, you begin with a question. If you want to see somebody move, ask them a question that goes to the heart of your need, and then express what your need is. And I often marvel at the precision of Torah and its wisdom, and that's what these 5 daughters do. They say, Lama yigara shem avinu mitoch mishpachto. Why should the name of our father be obliterated from his family? Ki ein lo ben, because he had no son? Question mark. As if now Moses, think about the fairness, not just to us, but to our father, who had the privilege of 5 children. But because of the gender difference, his name would be lost, his possession would be lost, and then they are clear what they're seeking. Tina lanu achuza. Give us his portion, his holding among our father's kinsmen. And so here's what happens then. Moses brings the case, v'yikarev Moshe et mishpatan, their judgment, lifnei Adonai, before God. Now, the rabbis will comment that Moses has created an appellate process. We saw that in Parsha Yitro, so that only the most difficult cases work their way up through a series of judgments. And then it's for Moses to convene with God, which is to say Moses retains a quality of responsibility and authority. But you might have noted when I introduced this, when the daughters come forward, they come forward with the leaders in their presence as well as the community, which is to say, everybody knows that this is going to be brought to Moses. It's worked its way through appeal, according to the sages. And here's what Moses says in response after communing with God. Circle this next word, Cain. Yes. I love the fact that he doesn't, when I watch these interviews on Sunday morning, and a politician's asked a question that I want to hear the yes or no to, and they immediately pivot. And I just want to say, first start with your bottom line. Is it yes or no? I love the fact that in this case, first the answer, Cain, yes. And then Moses explains, the daughters of Zelophehad is just. You should give them a hereditary holding among their father's kinsmen. Transfer their father's share to them. Further, speak to the Israelite people as follows. This is again Moses continuing. If a man dies without leaving a son, you shall transfer his property to his daughter. If he has no daughter, you shall assign his property to his brother. If he has no brothers, you shall assign it to his father's brothers. But this shall be the law of procedure for the Israelites in accordance with the Lord's command to Moses. Now I pause, and I hear the voice of Jacob Milgram, one of the great Bible scholars of our generation, who taught here at CBI in our Beit Midrash. What he taught that day was what he said was the most common line in the entire Torah, most repeated line, that has no commentary in traditional commentary. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. And God spoke to Moses saying, says that's over and over. What does it mean, he said? And for him, who was a religious man and a deep scholar, that when we say that God spoke, it means that what will follow coming through Moses as the admired and honored leader of the people is the highest understanding of what God would want as justice, as goodness. And so when I hear this closing, such was commanded by Yud-He Vav-He to Moses, Jacob Milgram's unpacking of Vaydaber Adonai Moshe lemor comes to my foreground. And so that's the law. Here, chapter 27, these 5 women, unmarried, come forward and they say, Moses, our father has died. He has a stake of land in the future that you have promised. What's going to happen? Isn't it only right that his name persists? Is it thereby not right that his daughters inherit? And Moses pauses and goes to God and answers Cain, yes. And this will be the law. If there are no sons, this is how the land will then be inherited. But there's a problem, and this is the last verses of the book. And it returns. There's a lot of other issues that come up in between. In Matot Maseh, vows, an attack by the Midianites, the petition of Reuven and God not to have to settle in the land, but to help the fight to conquer the land. The journey is recapped. Land boundaries are presented. Levitical cities are described, refugee cities for manslaughter. But it concludes with the following. The beginning of chapter 36, the final chapter. The family heads of the clan of the descendants of Gilad, son of Machir, son of Manasseh, one of the Joseph clans, came forward and appealed to Moses and the chieftains, family heads of the Israelites. This is the same clan of the daughters of Zelophehad. And they said, Adoni, the Lord commanded my Lord to assign the land to the Israelites as shares by lot. And my Lord further commanded by the Lord to assign the share of our kinsman Zelophehad to his daughters. But here's the problem, verse 3. If these daughters marry persons from another Israelite tribe, their share will be cut off from our ancestral portion and be added to the portion of the other tribe into which the daughters married. Thus, the allotted portion of our tribe will be diminished. And even when the Israelites observe the Jubilee in the 50th year, their share, the share of the daughters of Zelophehad, will be not reclaimed by our tribe, but will go to the tribe of their husbands. And our portion of the tribes will thereby be diminished. And so Moses, verse 5, instructs the Israelites saying, Al pi Adonai lemor, according to the speaking of Yud He Vav He, saying, Cain, here too, it's the other yes. Cain, you too are right. Matei ben ne Yosef Dovrim, you the staff, the tribe of the children of Joseph, in what you are pleading is just. This is what God now commands to the daughters of Zelophehad, saying, L'tov beinehem, it's good, whatever is good in your eyes, tiyel nashim, who you would wish to marry, you may do so. But you must marry somebody of your father's tribe to be for you as wives. No inheritance of the Israelites may pass over from one tribe to another, but the Israelites must remain bound each to their respective ancestral portions. Every daughter among the Israelite tribes who inherit a share must marry someone from a clan of her father's tribe in order that every Israelite may keep his ancestral share whole. Thus no inheritance shall pass over from one tribe to another, but the Israelite tribe shall remain bound each to its portion. And now the daughters are honored. The daughters of Zelophehad did as the Lord had commanded Moses. Machla, Tirzah, Hogla, Milcah, and Noah. Zelophehad's daughters were married to sons of their uncles, marrying at the clans of descendants of Manasseh, son of Yosef, so their share remained in the tribe of their father's clan. There'll be one more sentence, and I'll come back to that. But that's the closing paragraph of Numbers. And here's what I find so inspiring. First is this dynamic, and I want to emphasize that the daughters until now have been a group, the 5 daughters. And only with this resolution do we hear their names. Some of us may know, I do, I have a family member named Noah. Others I've known a Tirzah and a Milcah, which is that these 5 daughters, their names are now proclaimed to honor them and to say they did what was requested. They were young women when they came forward, and now they are now married. But they married cousins in this context to enable the tribe to retain its wholeness. And here's what I find so remarkable. Law unfolds. That's where we end. We end in this closing paragraph with another pronouncement of, wait a moment, there's something I haven't considered. Moses already considered the plea of the 5 daughters and said, you know, you're right, Cain. Your father should not lose his inheritance because he had no sons. But the tribe now says, well, wait a moment. If that's the way you just announced it, we're going to get a smaller parcel every time a man dies without sons and the daughter marries another tribe. And soon, you know, what about us as a community and our inheritance as a tribe? And Moses says, you're right too. And with God, I have a just response. There is a compromise for you, the daughters. You marry who you want, but choose someone from within your own tribe so that the land and the balance of values, because you see, that's the challenge of law. The challenge of law is it's not between good and bad. That's too easy. Real law is between good and better, or if you will, between bad and worse. It's weighing values. And in some cases, seeking a compromise, and sometimes saying it's yes or no. But at its best, it's finding a way to meet the respective needs. And that's what Moses does. He says to the daughters, you will have choice as to who you marry. At the same time, there's going to be a limitation in the choice to honor the needs of your extended family. And that seems to be accepted by the daughters. Some people think of Torah as given in one fell swoop at Mount Sinai, but that's not how the Torah describes it. The Torah describes law given at Mount Sinai that will yet need to be unpacked and understood, depending on changing situations and new questions that arise. But I want to understand this is not also a democracy in this context. In this context, Moses is at the end of the appeals process as the one closest to the source of right and wrong, closest to the voice of God. The community will deal with legal issues in a hierarchy, but at a certain point it will be Moses here who has authority. I am reminded of how law requires study. To be a judge is not simple. To be a judge requires knowing both what are the precedents, because that's the norms over generations of a community. What's the document? In this case, what's the nature of the Torah? Because you're ultimately, in the case of teaching and finding law in Torah, I'm talking about a judge later on, needed to know that corpus and how it gets interpreted. In America, we think that everything is equal, and it is as an aspiration, but not in terms of a wisdom-making decision. We turn to experts. I wouldn't want anybody to fix my plumbing. I had a plumbing problem this week. That's why it comes to mind. I want somebody who has the tools and the expertise to know how to fix my problem. We rely on expertise, and no less in law. There is a body of learning that's valuable. Not infallible, but valuable. Not infallible because even here Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our great teacher, has a question that he has to pause and say, wait, let me think this through. Let me speak to God. And then say clearly, yes, their claim is just. Yes, the tribe's claim is just. Here's a way of reconciliation. This coming Tuesday, we as a community of CBI, and anybody in the larger community who wishes to get the Zoom address from our website, will have the privilege of a conversation with Professor Elliot Dorff. Elliot Dorff was my teacher of philosophy when I was a rabbinical school student in Los Angeles, and is the leading ethicist of the Jewish community in America. Elliot Dorff is an author of 14 books on ethics, including a remarkable book on Jewish medical ethics. He's taught as well. He's taught at American Jewish University for many years. He has also taught at UCLA Law School for many years, religion and law, and he has served on their ethics panel at UCLA Medical Center, that prestigious medical center in our midst, for many years. To prepare for our public conversation on Tuesday at 7:30, I spoke with my dear teacher this week, and he said to me regarding medical ethics that the committee used to meet once a month. but during COVID has been meeting once a week because there are new questions. So I said, well, give me an example. He said, as a medical ethics committee, one of our responsibilities is to give guidelines as to triage. If somebody is in the emergency room or there's a shortage of ventilators, who gets that ventilator first? And usually the bottom line is, for whomever the ventilator proves most useful has the priority, the greatest chance of recovery. But he said as we discuss it, we're still in mid-discussion because we're aware it's more complicated. For the reality in this case, he said, is that browns and black people, and he said those are the languages of Hispanics and African Americans that is used in that conversation, browns and blacks as a group have less access to health care. And so when they get COVID, they have greater risks in recovery. They also are more likely to catch COVID because their work is often not from a computer at home, but working in a kitchen or side by side in a factory or making deliveries, and they are more vulnerable. And so he said, here's the question that we're still wrestling with. All things aren't equal. And so in assessing priority for a ventilator, to what degree do we take into account not only who has the greater possibility of gaining from the use of the ventilator, but in weighing it, what if there's a greater incidence of people having those handicaps because of the pre-existing situation? Now that's an example of a very tough issue. That's a real issue, and in which experience medically matters, and in which experience philosophically and legally matter too. That's not a simple question, and there too we need experts. The second area of expertise of Professor Dorff is Jewish law. He serves as the chair of the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards, a committee that I had the privilege to serve on for 20 years. He stands, I hope you're not watching, I know Elliot's not watching this. He does stand truly shoulders above in terms of his knowledge, his clarity, and his ability to decide. We, in COVID, have another kind of question as Jews. We have rules for Shabbat. And among those rules are you're not supposed to create on Shabbat. That's lighting a fire. But it's also fixing and making. Shabbat's the time in which to experience the world as whole. And traditionally that meant that on Shabbat we didn't use technology. We didn't broadcast on Shabbat. But in COVID, the only way we can reach community, as in this moment, is by using a camera and having somebody help operate the technology behind it. How can that happen with this balancing? Again, it's not yes or no. And those who say, well, what the hell, just do it. Well, I understand the need. But there's also the need to honor Shabbat. And so how do you balance the two? How do you maintain Shabbat for this moment, but more as a precedent for the future? And I used a four-letter word in a moment. It's not too strong, hopefully in the realm of four-letter words. But I do it because viscerally, these are issues that bring an argument to the foreground within community. And to resolve such understandable, and I honor the needs on all sides, that too requires learning, clarity, and calmness. And that's why the guidance of the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards for Rabbis matters, because these are not just the bottom line. These are issues of process, of weighing values, of finding, in some cases, as in this case, a compromise that serves both to come together as a community on your screen and to do so with a sense of tension, at least, around the needs of maintaining the category of Shabbat. And one last category of COVID and this moment that too requires or is valued to have expertise. Professor Elie was the president of the Los Angeles Jewish Family Service. He is a man of a big heart and psychological astuteness. And he, in our conversation, I said to him, you've done a lot of conversations with others. What haven't they asked you about that you would hope to address in our conversation on that Tuesday night? And he said, no one's asked me about families living together 24/7 and the stresses that creates. We love our families, but 24/7 can be rough. And I would like to address what are the emotional challenges and needs of people who are living alone, or if they're privileged to live as families that come even in that setting. For he, in his greatness, is more than about the mind, and he knows that law is not about mathematics. It's not adding up a sum. It's knowing how to weigh those variables. That's the difference between good judgment and cavalier conclusions. And so I am privileged, we are privileged, to have in our midst teachers. And I see Professor Elie as the best of us. I hear the giggle of his easy laugh. I see the responsibility of him as a husband for a wife with serious physical challenges, being there at her side after many years of marriage. He represents, for me, a model of character, quality that Moses represented in the desert. And so the concluding line before we chant traditionally, Chazak, Chazak, v'nit chazek, strong, strong, may we be strengthened. The concluding line of Bamidbar, Eila hamitzvot v'hamishpatim. These are the expectations and the rational holdings, Asher tziva Adonai, which were commanded by the ever-present one, Biyad Moshe, into the hand of Moses, El B'nai Yisrael, to the children of Israel, and Ba'aravot Moav, on the steps of Moab, Al Yarden Yerecho, at the Jordan, near Jericho. Ribono Shalom, Master of the universe, law matters. That's what our Torah reading ends with, a recognition that community needs laws. Because without laws, we will naturally do what's expedient. Not always. Sometimes we'll remember the higher message. But you see, it's only human nature to rationalize. And law at its best is done at arm's length, weighing values, weighing precedent, and hearing the voice of a core calling of right and wrong, of a morality, hearing the voice of Yud Hey Vav Hey. On this Shabbat, we mourn the passing of Congressman John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, two leaders of civil rights who called on us as a nation to rise to the highest values of our founders, the values of equality for all, the values of opportunity, of equality. In the case of John Lewis, it meant walking on a bridge in Selma on a Sunday that would be known as Bloody Sunday, coming close to losing his life by thugs in uniform, sadly, who beat him with a stick, cracking his skull open, and going back to that bridge as soon as he healed to march again, to risk his life again, to say that justice, quoting Amos, must come down like a mighty stream. Our nation has moved forward, but it is law ultimately, and not just a call to our own goodness. Because as a nation, we know we are interdependent, and that it is law that teaches us what is right and what is wrong. Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe, in our own Jewish community, we too see ourselves as a people guided by law. That Shabbat as a sacred gift has a container, an architecture with rules that are to be honored. Not always to be dealt with the same way in a COVID moment, but what makes us true to the teachings of our ancestors is that Shabbat does matter, and that how we also reach out to each other with technology matters too, but is to be dealt with and guided by those who are learned. For ultimately, the right and the wrong, if left to ourselves, will be an act of expediency rather than judgment. Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe. The greats among us are a light. And that's true for Professor Elie, for all of us who were his students. It's true for those who write of John Lewis, who knew him as a person. Lights, models, exemplars of character and values. May we honor their light, and may we be guided by it. And may they, as they were, be guided by your supreme light. And together we say, Amen.